Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Adam Interviews, where we are talking to local folks doing things of note in our community. I got to tell you, I am super psyched about today's episode because so often I'm interviewing folks doing things that I know absolutely nothing about. And that's the beauty of that type of interview, is I get to explore their life and kind of live in their world for a little bit. The wonderful thing about today is I get to talk to two folks who live in a world that I know very well, and that's radio. I know that you see me on TV, but I actually got my start at WAER 88.3 FM in Syracuse, and then worked at 570 WSYR for my first commercial job. I actually got paid $7 an hour, and then got a raise to $8 an hour the year after that, so I was very happy. That was in Syracuse, New York, and my two guests right now have experience way beyond what I do in radio. We have Gary Smith, who is just a legend in the radio world in the Rochester, in the upstate region, really, Western New York and Central New York. And then, of course, Joe Lomonaco, a friend to all over at WHAM 1180 iHeart. And Joe, Gary, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
You bet.
Absolutely.
So this came about because Joe Lomonaco, at least it came about for me, and why I'm somewhat informed in this is Joe did a wonderful interview with Gary, and I found out through that Gary, you worked here at News 8, really what's 201 Humboldt Street. It was Rochester Radio City when it opened in 1948 for many years. Why don't you talk about your relationship to this building that you're in, having not been here for several years?
Well, spent a long time in this building from 1962 to 1978. And it was a great place to work. I mean, I had gone through this building with my parents in 1948 when the building opened, and there was a huge open house for the city that WHAM put on. And so I went through this building when I was about 11 years old. And then 12 or 13 years later, I wound up working in this building, which was kind of fun. It really was neat. Free parking was a wonderful thing. Just drive in the back lot and park every day, and that was nice. But the building was great, had so much history, and being a radio geek, I listened to WHAM when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, because that's what was on in our house and my grandparents' house. So it was really fun coming over here and working in this building for the number of years I did.
Joe, I don't know. I'm giddy, the fact that we have him here.
Yeah, the fact that there's a connection to this place, and that, number one, it's still standing. I mean, it very well could have been that as radio downsized, got more, didn't need the space, didn't need the room of this place, and that a use for this building could still be here, and it wasn't just raised and something new put in its place. So this connection to the past of this community and to the past of media and news gathering in this community still stands. And it is fun to walk into this place. I've seen some of the old pictures of what happened in here and how it was set up for radio, what rooms were used for things, and where orchestras may have been for live broadcasts, where shows with audiences were done, where the nightly newscast is done currently. That's where that side of the building is. It's just so... It's like a living museum in a way. You kind of drop yourself into it and go like, yeah, I can feel the spirits of everybody who was here before. It still lives in these walls.
I think that's so true, and I feel very lucky every time I walk in the building, I feel a connection, and there aren't many TV stations like this anymore. And for those who don't know, just a 30-second history, this was owned and built by Stromberg Carlson, which was building radios at the time right over in the factory next door that's now Radio Social, Comedy at the Carlson, and they built this to house their radio stations. And correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, but I've been told in a kind of a joking way that they added WHAM TV as kind of a nod to a trend they thought might not actually pan out. They thought radio was really where it was at.
Well, for a while it was where it was at.
That's true.
And for a long time for WHAM, of course. And you're right. The story I heard was that the TV end of the building was almost an afterthought. Well, maybe this will happen, so we'll build a space for it. And part of the space they never built that was originally set up by the architects, I guess. And they wound up not building that larger space on the TV end, but obviously built a big enough space to use TV there.
While you were here, Tom Decker was here. I think you had said to Joe in the interview that Tom used to leave in between newscasts to go announce the Red Wings games. What was the atmosphere like? What was it like to work here in the 60s?
Well, it was a whole lot different than things are now, obviously, but it was a little more relaxed. Everybody knew everybody else, and we had been working together for a long time. At the older studios that Channel 10 had, the WVET end of Channel 10, over on Clinton Avenue in the old Central Trust building, which is no longer there, which is an indication of how old it is. But we moved over here in 1962, and it was a completely different feeling because when we were at Channel 10 and WVET and WHEC shared Channel 10, it was only half TV because they only had the station half of the week. And there was a lot of interest in radio still. Radio was still a big deal. And then coming over here where television was full-time and radio studios were huge and the wonderful old airlocks and sound locks and go through 2 doors to get into your studio. It was just a feeling of this is really a good deal.
Yeah. And I can only imagine, and I think when we look back on the history of radio, we owe Joe a debt of gratitude and some others for helping to preserve that memory. And part of it isn't just the logistics of preserving the tape and the stories, but also just the enthusiasm for it. Where does that come from, Joe, for you?
For me, it was the people that I heard in growing up in Binghamton, New York, which is where I spent my childhood, they were larger than life people. They were in my home every day. I connected with them in a way that I couldn't really put my finger on until later when I actually started doing it to get an understanding of what kind of a bond an audience can have with people that they don't see, but they hear every day, and they share stories and they feel like they're a part of that world. And Doug Embledge, our colleague, would refer to the transient nature of our business is that you say it and it goes into a microphone and it goes into a transmitter and it goes off to Mars and it's gone. But fortunately, some people had the forethought to save bits and pieces of that so that it wasn't just off to Mars. We could actually go back and listen to it. And to be able to have those records preserved so that other people could see, well, this is how we did it. This is what it was like in this town. This is how big, to Gary's point, how big radio was in its heyday, even up through the 50s and into the 60s and 70s. It was still dominant. It was just dominant in different ways. And it's interesting to hear now how I think in some ways we've kind of come back to that old way of doing it. And podcasting has certainly done that, where there are shows that are interviews but done in front of audiences. There are scripted shows and dramas that are being done in podcast form the way they did it back in the commercial days when that was your lone source of entertainment. So it's a great way to give a nod to the past while sort of understanding the industry and giving a clue as to why we do things the way we do today.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think it helps me understand what I've been thinking about, which is the connection that's made voice to voice. Yes, I work in a visual medium, but there's something very basic and I think deep within the human spirit of the voice to voice connection. And I think that radio relationship speaks to that.
Absolutely. It's one of the first things that I think we learn to recognize as humans. It's, say, the voice of a parent or a grandparent, and those things are, you think about if you've lost a parent, what that parent's voice sounded like, and somewhere you can still hear that. The connection of that through the ear and how that all works. It's a fascinating science I don't know very much about, but you're right, it is very strong.
Yeah, no, voice to ear, that's what I should say. And yeah, I mean, it's like you watch something that's right here, but you hear something and it's
in there.
It's deep in there. Gary, real quick, I want to go back further. You said that when you were at Syracuse, you worked at a radio station on campus, which is what I did, WAER.
WAER.
Is it the same one? I was going to ask you
did.
that. Oh my goodness. What was that? Where was it at the time?
An old Quonset hut behind the old library. All the Quonset huts they had built during World War II.
Oh, you're not joking. It really was. Okay.
And that's where it was.
Okay.
The only great thing about the studios at that point, all of the radio operation had brand new equipment because GE was still making radio and TV equipment at that time, and they field tested all of their stuff at WAER. And we had brand new consoles, turntables, everything.
Oh, you're lucky.
And it was fun that way.
I bet. When I was there, it was by that point an NPR station. I'm guessing that was NPR even around at that time. I don't even know the history, how deep that history goes.
AER was Carrier Current. When I was there.
Oh yeah, Carrier Company.
So
yeah.
Didn't go a whole lot, but there were a lot of students there to listen if they cared.
So Carrier Company, that has nothing to do with Carrier Company then when you said Carrier Current. That's a type of broadcast.
Yeah.
I have no idea about that, so you're teaching me. So it was not.
It's simply, you could hear it in the environs of the university.
Gotcha.
And that was pretty much it.
Yeah. And then you went to Buffalo for a little bit, and you ended up back home in Rochester because you had grown up in Pittsford, at least in your teen years. What made you stay? How come you decided to remain in the Rochester market?
Well, I had finished my growing up years here. My wife had always lived here, and we were starting to have a family at that time. I did have some opportunities to go other places, but I just felt comfortable here. I didn't want, as Joe mentioned earlier, the itinerant part of our business. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to be pulling my kids out of school every other year if I decided to go work somewhere else. And it just felt more comfortable to be here and raise our kids here.
Yeah, well, I think we can all empathize with that to some degree. And Joe, what I found fascinating about your interview is as I was listening to it, I realized that Gary is like a human representation of the evolution of radio.
Well, yeah. I mean, and because he's been through the eras,
right?
And he's been on the front lines of that, coming in from those personality jocks in the rock and roll era, coming out of the late 50s into radio's transition musically into the 1960s, through the advent of talk radio as it came in, and talk radio we kind of think of as like as a Rush Limbaugh invention, but it really isn't. That started to come in even into the 70s, where that started to be something that was in there. So, and also to see how guys like Gary and Nick Nixon and Jack Palvino and Danny Guilfoyle, just people that were associated with us at WHAM in one way or another, moved from being on-air personalities, moved into the business end. Gary's also worked at an agency. He's done play-by-play for the Rochester Red Wings, I think, in every decade, Gary, I think it's been every decade since the 50s.
Yeah, every decade so far.
Yeah, so far. Well, you know what? You just keep on living and they'll put you back in that booth. So he's been through all of it and been on the front lines of all of it to have seen how it has transitioned from not only as a listener, but also from someone who's worked in different avenues of it throughout those 50 plus years that he's been involved with it. So it really is. He's our connection to the past and to when radio was still that dominant player.
Yeah, it's interesting. Speaking of connections to the past and living representations of it, there are people that I wish I had been able to interview. Ann Keefe, Tom Decker, of course. I find it I find it sad that I had the chance. I just never did it with Jack Palvino.
Mm-hmm.
And he passed away last year or 2 years ago now, I think. And
Yeah,
what a titan within the radio industry. If you want to talk a little bit about him, Gary.
well, he was, and Jack made his name early on at WBBF, and they were a huge top 40 radio station here, and they had great ratings. Jack didn't start as the morning man, but wound up being the morning man for a number of years there. It just was great to listen to, and he was a really nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then he moved into station ownership. He and Bud Wertheimer bought WVOR, and then I worked with Jack for 7 years at WVOR, and then a number of years after that at Wham, when they had purchased Wham as well. So he was a real giant in the industry here in many ways.
You talk about local ownership. I think that's been one of the biggest changes. Not even think, I know it's been one of the biggest changes in both TV and radio, because back in the day, it was owned by local people. I mean, Stromberg Carlson built this building, and I worked for Clear Channel, iHeart. What do you think about the conglomeration, the growth within these big national broadcasting companies? Was this a necessity? Did it have to happen?
I'm not sure it had to happen, and I'm not really happy that it did happen. I think it just took a lot away from local radio stations who had been owned by local people. When I started in the business, I knew the owners. They knew me. They knew my family. We had get-togethers every year as an entire station that the owners paid for, picnics and all kinds of good get-togethers, and it helped really to engender a good feeling throughout the whole building. And then that started to go away, of course, with the Clear Channels, which became iHeart, and Odysseys and the rest. I don't think it has been a good thing for the business. I think it's been a good thing for the shareholders of those companies, but I would love to see it back the way it was. I doubt that it will go there, but it was a better time in the business, in my opinion.
Mm. Well, maybe as Joe was saying, with the modern era, where in a weird way we're retrofitting radio and TV through podcasts, and people can do it independently. I think what's interesting, though, is despite the changes in culture, in ownership, and all this, Joe, I get the impression when I go to different cities, I don't see it as much. The radio personalities are still big in our area. People tune in, they listen, they talk about what Duffy said, or what was said in the sports talk. There's still a connection, and that community seems strong despite the storm.
It is, and I think it really just goes to that connection we talked about earlier, and becoming part of people's routines and day. If you're the morning person or you're the afternoon guy because you're catching people in their cars or what have you, there is a lot of sense of community there, and also the fact that in this town, and I don't know whether it's the same in communities across the country, but we have a longevity here of people who have been doing this and part of people's lives for decades. Mm-hmm. You look at Brother Wease, 40 plus, Tony Infantino, Scott Spezzano,
Dino.
These people who have been around for decades and doing the same thing. And they could have gone other places, potentially. They could have been the journeyman who decided, okay, I'm going to do a few years here, then I'm going to move out of state because I need to get to a bigger market, or that's my plan. There are those in radio and in television. You look at the Don Alharts. You look at Nikki Rudd. You look at Doug Embledge and Ginny Ryan, people that have been on for a long, long time. You become ingrained in the community in a way that is very special to an audience, and they're going to seek you out, even if it's not appointment listening or viewing if they're going to an app to listen to something later. They still want to engage with you. They still want to hear the stories that you have to tell. They're just going to do it in a different way. So I think we have something very unique in Rochester when it comes to our media. We like to hold on to people, and we really like to keep them in our lives for as long as possible.
I think that's a great way to say it. And I think is in this age of distrust, I think trust can be found within the relationship between local media personalities and journalists and the community. And so one thing I was wondering, so take me through one of the more memorable days on air for you, if you can, Gary. I know Joe had mentioned the ice storm changing the landscape in 91, but if you do have one from the 60s or 70s where it was just either mayhem or just something very memorable that sticks out to you.
I do remember very clearly the day that JFK was assassinated. I was on the air doing the midday shift on WROC AM, and my brother was my engineer at the time. And suddenly he's waving to me, listen to Channel 2 on your earphones. Well, Channel 2 was the Q channel, but we could listen to the CBS network. We could listen to anything he wanted to put on Q. Well, the network didn't have anything on live at that point, but we could still hear. There were people running around and yelling and saying something happened in Dallas. We've got to find out what it is. And just listening to this before anyone really knew what had happened was, in retrospect, very eerie. It was incredibly interesting, but you really didn't want to be a part of that just because of what was happening. But we could hear it before the network took over. First, the radio network went on the air with the information, and they still were not sure what had happened or how. And then when everybody knew what had happened, then CBS put Walter Cronkite on TV and radio, doing the entire thing from that point on. But that is certainly a day in the business I'll never forget.
I can't believe you brought that up. As it happens, my wife and I are watching Mad Men, and we just watched the episode where Kennedy was shot. And I guess I didn't realize the emotion that existed throughout the entire country and offices. Was it emotional here at the station at the time?
Very. When we did learn finally what had happened, there were people in tears, and frankly, I'm not sure I could have gone back on the air at that point. We went completely to the network coverage and just held that the whole time. But it was very emotional, not only because of the man who just had a wonderful reputation at that point, and new and different and young, but the fact that someone had done that to our president was just hard to fathom at that point.
Wow. I did not expect to be talking about this today, but I'm so glad we are, because I think it speaks to, again, I want to focus in on this, Joe, the connection that radio provides. Not just, we already talked about how radio connects with the listener, but I think it connects listeners because we're all listening to the same thing at the same time, and there's a communal experience about that. And in a time when civic institutions are declining, hopefully the pendulum will shift, but we're not connecting with each other like we used to because of social media and just isolation. Radio provides an outlet to do that. And I think it's super important to stress that as almost a community need, not just a commercial endeavor, that we need radio in our lives.
Yeah, and we've seen it happen here in, to that point, referencing the ice storm in 1991. I was not in the business. I was a student at the State University at Geneseo during the ice storm. And when everything else went dark, radio was still there. And it was if you think of it like a spider web, the station was the central hub where people could connect to and through to get services into neighborhoods, to let people know what was happening across town, because you couldn't see it, you couldn't get there. It at least gave people an idea of what was happening from someone else's point of view. And it also goes back to just hearing the voices of your neighbors, so that you know that they are okay. In a social media setting, yes, we are still connected. And to Gary's point about how information moved during the Kennedy assassination, from the time that something happens now, and you know it too, Adam, because you probably see it, how fast information with some clarity starts to come across your screen or to your phone. It isn't something happened in Dallas. That wouldn't be the first thing. The first thing would be a litany of details, right or wrong, would be the stuff that would start coming through. So it enables a fast move of information, but also this media has allowed the boots on the ground to be the one telling the stories. And then it goes back to what we talked about before, how powerful stories are, how powerful connections are in the voices of other people. To know that, number one, maybe you're going through the same kind of situation, you're feeling the same sorts of things, to know you're not alone in this, regardless of if it's a big national event or something that's just impacting the community. And
let's be very clear too, I didn't mean to go down this avenue either, but if there were an emergency and power were knocked out, Joe Lomonaco and a handful of people are standing at the ready to deliver the news that you need to know if you got a crank radio. That's really, you kind of, in a way, like daily you provide a service to the community, but we as broadcasters, that's probably our base function, right? Like we have been building ourselves to that moment where we can be there for folks when they need us.
Yeah, and to realize that what we do, yes, it is a business, but at its core is a community service. It is a community service tool. And when you look back to the history of the industry in not just Rochester, it's basically everywhere, there was a focus and an idea of what these institutions were going to be for the towns in which they served. They were, yes, going to be a place where entertainment could be provided, but they were to be a resource and a way of disseminating information clearly, efficiently to a broad group of people as possible. That is still our function today, even though it is part of many other functions and many other responsibilities that we have in the current business landscape, of course, but at its core function, it is a community resource, and we have to sometimes remind ourselves that we are there to do that job.
Yeah, one with accountability, because you can yell at us in the grocery store. Yeah. Gary, before I let both of you go here, I do have to ask, how, after all these years, have you maintained your mellifluous radio voice?
Oh yeah, I got to know this.
I really don't know. If I knew, I would try to market it.
A tincture of some sort.
Yes.
No, wonderful. Well, both of you, I can't thank you both enough for joining me. And I'm sorry if you guys felt like I kind of went down my own trail here, but this is my show.
It's your show. Do as you like, Ben.
I don't care.
Yeah, go. You're good.
All right. Gary, Joe, thank you so much. And thank you for being part of our lives all these years.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Enjoyed it.
All right. Very good. So we were just speaking with Gary Smith and Joe Lomonaco, both big radio personalities in our region, and Joe just doing incredible work maintaining the history. So I want to thank everyone out there for watching this episode of Adam Interviews. I hope that you can tell your friends and family about the Rochester First streaming app, as we are continuing to put on great and new material all the time, right at the click of your remote. All right, everyone, take care. We'll talk soon.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.